I want to start off by saying that this featherboard is designed to work with my fence system. And if my fence system is something that you don't have, what's wrong with you? You should have this. It's excellent. I also want to mention the comment that suggested this in the first place. Now, if you have my fence system or you're going to build it soon, you can get plans for this. They're available on my website. There's a link in the description that'll take you right there. As always, the first step is to cut out the parts, and these are made from 2 different thicknesses of plywood, 1/2 inch and 3/4. And you don't need a lot of that for this. I had scraps in my scrap wood closet, and the parts and the construction of the jig is not complex at all. For the most part, it's straight cuts and butt joints held together with glue and screws. Some parts have an angle cut, and that angle cut is actually optional, but I like to do it anyway because it makes it look neater, more finished. And to make those cuts, I'm going to be using my tapering jig. And once again, if you don't have one of these, what's wrong with you? I designed and built this several years ago, and even though I don't use it very often, it's very handy when I need to do something like this. The way this works for small parts like this is you make the marks on the bottom edge and line that up with the edge of the jig. Clamp it down tight and make the cut. The trickiest part to make is the cam handle itself. The plan has the dimensions that you'll mark out on the blank, and here's what that looks like. What you have here are 2 points. One is the center point for the cam, and the other one is the center point for the hole. So I'm going to use my compact compass first to draw the circle for the cam, and my compact compass is something else you should have. And with that done, I can drill the 3/8 inch hole on the other point. Now, it's very important not to get these 2 points mixed up. It won't work if you drill the hole centered on the cam. While I have the 3/8 inch bit in the drill press, I'm going to drill the holes through the left and right bracket. The right bracket is 3/4 inch plywood, the left is 1/2 inch thick, but other than that, they're identical. They're exactly the same. It's not a bad idea to drill out the hole in the cam slightly oversized so that the pin won't bind in the hole. So after that, it's just a matter of cutting out the shape and then refining it on the sanders. If anything, you want to leave this slightly oversized. That way you can sand it down to fine-tune the fit. Other than screws, there are only 2 metal parts in the project. And the first one is the rub plate, and I'm using a piece of steel for that. Although if you have aluminum 1/8 of an inch thick, that will work as well. The piece that I have is a little bit too wide, so I'm cutting it down to make it the right size. And the pin is just a piece of 3/8 inch round bar. Although if you don't have this size pin, you can use something else. I wouldn't go any smaller than this though, 3/8 or above. With that done, I can get started on assembly. And the first step is to glue and clamp the left bracket to the end of the brace, and then put that aside for at least a 1/2 hour for the glue to dry enough to move on to the next step. The next step is to glue the filler and the right side bracket on and clamp that up. And before I set that aside to dry, I'm actually going to get the rub plate installed. I'm going to drill a pilot hole for a 1-inch wood screw and drive that in loosely so that the plate can move freely. It's actually better if you drill this hole before you glue the parts together. That makes more sense. Now I can get the back glued to what I've already got glued up, and once again clamp that up and let it dry. But before I set it aside, I can get one of the screws put in. I'm just going to drill a pilot hole and drive it in. And here you can see a little bit sticking out on the end. The back looks like it's too long. And that's because the thickness of the plywood is not exactly a 1/2 inch and 3/4. They're a little bit less. But it really doesn't matter over here. It needs to be flush on the right, but it can stick out over here. You can always trim it off after. While I'm waiting for that to dry, I can work on the part that I'm calling the toothbrush. And once again, I'm making that from 3/4 inch plywood. And then I need to determine how long this needs to be. You position it so that it's sticking out 5 inches beyond the inside face of the rail that attaches to your saw. And then you measure up to where the blade begins when it's about halfway up. And then you can trim it to length and make the other cuts before making the angled cuts for what I'm calling the bristles. These are actually the fingers of the featherboard. And to make these cuts, I've changed the blade in my table saw to one that cuts a little bit thicker. I've also tilted my saw over to 45 degrees, and I'm using my mini table saw sled to hold the toothbrush while I pass it through. And you want to lay this out so that you have 6 fingers in there, but the spacing doesn't have to be perfect. And for the bristles, you need to cut a strip of very straight grain wood. It needs to be a hardwood that's springy. I'm using oak, and I'm cutting it in one long strip from the edge of a board after I get the thickness correctly dialed in. I'm going to cut these about 2 inches long, and I'm also going to cut some spares. Just in case I drop this on the floor and they break, I can always cut out the ones that are broken and glue in new ones. The cam is probably not going to be a perfect fit on the first try. That's why you want to leave it a little bit big and then carefully sand it down until it is working properly. The final step is to actually fasten this to the part that clamps onto the fence rail. And to do that, I'm just going to use a pair of screws. I'm not going to use any glue on this. If I want to leave this so I can take it off in case I do need to replace those fingers in the future. This is the part where I'm supposed to show you how it works, but I discovered that I made a mistake. I didn't make the fingers long enough. So I guess I won't be needing those spares anymore. I'm going to have to cut a new strip, except this time I'm going to be cutting them to 3.5 inches long. Of course, I've got to cut off and cut out the old ones and then glue in the new ones. Now you see while I'm gluing this in that they actually stick down on the bottom about 1/4 inch, and that's so that they'll be sitting flat on the top of the table saw, since the toothbrush part is actually that much above the table saw top. This also changes the way you calculate the length, but what I recommend is just leave it long, and then when you have the bristles glued in, the other parts made and ready to go, you can measure the length then correctly, very much like I'm doing here. As you can see, you can get it on fast, you can get it positioned fast, and you can take it off again when you're finished fast as well. Now, like I said in the beginning of the video, if you want plans for this, they're available on my website. There's a link in the description. Click that and it'll take you right there.